So far in my journey with Armored Core, the games have genuinely gotten better with every single entry. There has not been a single video so far where I didn't say, this is the best Armored Core game yet. And I had some of you guys in the comments of the Armored Core 2 video telling me that while you liked AC2, you preferred Another Age to it. So will the trend of improvement continue? Well, let's talk about it. And before I get too far into the video, I should mention that this is the fifth in a series of videos where I'm playing every Armored Core game for the first time and reviewing them as we go along in preparation for Armored Core 6 releasing at the end of this month. While it's not necessary to have seen those videos before this one, you'll be missing a lot of context about my personal journey through these games if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the playlist linked in the description below if you want to go watch those first. But getting back to things, Armored Core 2 Another Age is a standalone expansion for Armored Core 2, released 8 months after the original game. And rather than repeating the formula of the last 3 games in the franchise, FromSoftware decided to go back to the beginning and make a game more similar in structure to Armored Core 1. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean that there are more missions than in the last 3 games, and on top of that, there's no arena. And this was an absolute shock to me when loading into the menu for the first time. For me, the arena has been the key component of the pacing of the Armored Core games ever since it was introduced. If you ever get bored or frustrated while doing missions, you can go to the arena for a bit. And if you get bored or frustrated while playing around in the arena, you can go and do missions for a bit. This back and forth formula really helped to keep me engaged with the last 3 games, and I could not imagine what FromSoft possibly could have been thinking when they made this decision. And the best that I can really come up with is that they probably just wanted to differentiate this game from the last 3 and prevent them from feeling like the same game over and over again. But with that crazy decision out of the way, let's talk story. As far as the story goes here, there really isn't one. Another Age takes place 5 years after the events of Armored Core 2 and details the fighting of the various corporations and governments on Mars after the events of that game. And honestly, that sentence even oversells the story of the game a little bit. Out of all the games so far, this is the one that will make you feel the most like you are just a mercenary for hire doing missions purely for the sake of earning the credits from them. But as I've been doing for the Armored Core expansions, I decided to start a new save rather than just carrying over my file from the base game, so that I could better judge Another Age as a complete standalone product. And once again, the progression with a new game file in this expansion feels absolutely perfect. And honestly, at this point in my journey with the series, it feels like importing a base game save file would make the early missions of these expansions far too easy. But I know that some people have told me that a couple of the later expansions get really difficult, so I'll have to hold my tongue on that for now and see what happens down the line. And remember when I said that there were more missions in this game? Well, to be more exact, there are 100 missions in Another Age. It should go without saying that that is a ton of missions, and as we'll get to eventually, this was a good decision in some ways and not such a good decision in others. And the way that you accept these missions is slightly different too, where instead of just having one list of available contracts, you actually have a small map of areas that you can move between in the menu and take missions specific to that region. As you progress through certain levels, new areas and missions will be unlocked, opening up more potential ways for you to progress through the map and get to the end of the game. It is required that you complete every other mission before getting the final mission to open up, so every mission in the game is mandatory, but how you progress through them and in what order is completely up to you. One symptom of this approach, along with the sheer number of missions, is that you will see a lot of reused level environments. While there are exactly 100 missions in this game, there are probably only 40 or so maps that these missions take place in. Almost every single map in this game will be seen twice, there's a solid amount of them that you'll see 3 times, and there's a couple in particular that I know that I saw at least 4 times. And while we're on the topic of reusing levels, the reused level thing that I talked about in Armored Core 2 makes a return here as well. Remember that level from Project Phantasma where you fight a bunch of tanks in a crater before a tank track AC comes in out of nowhere? Well, that's here, it's just AC2ified. That classic submarine level with the ships? Well, that's here again too, except this time you're on offense instead of defense, actively attacking the ships rather than defending the submarine. Oh, and they changed the skybox and the lighting to be daytime rather than nighttime too with that one. Honestly, these sort of things are almost to be expected in a game pushing to have 100 levels in it, but if these sort of corners need to be cut in order to reach that number, then why should we be so dedicated to having 100 levels in the first place? I know that a lot of people probably enjoy the novelty of having a 100 mission AC game, but for me personally, I definitely prefer having a 30 or so mission campaign where every single mission in that campaign is completely unique to one another. But thankfully, Another Age features a couple of small but meaningful quality of life improvements from AC2. The first one is an incredibly simple change where if you're locked onto a target but there's something blocking your shot between you and them, the FCS lock will turn green instead of red. It sounds like nothing, but something like this really goes a long way in some situations. Another really small one is that when you earn a free AC part, there's a new UI alert that shows you an image of the part, as well as telling you on the image what type of part it is. This is a massive improvement over the first 4 games, as in those games, when you get a part, all you know is that you got a part, and it was on you to figure out what that part actually was. I don't know how this game was the first time that they thought of adding something like this, but I am so glad that they finally did. But one thing that I'm really sad to report about Another Age is that the pacing is just not right here. To be fair, this might have something to do with the fact that I do YouTube as a job and need to get through games like this in a timely manner, but this game felt like more of a slog than any other Armored Core game before it. It's essentially like if we took the pacing of Armored Core 1 and we stretched it out from 30 missions to 100. If you weren't trying to get through this game in a reasonable amount of time, this could pretty much just be a giant AC sandbox game where you can get 12 to 18 hours out of a single playthrough, but that doesn't change the fact that it's just a massive downgrade from the last few games in terms of its pacing. And then there's the one change that I really just can't wrap my head around. When you fail a mission in Another Age, you don't need to pay for repairs or ammo costs. On top of that, there is not a single mission in Another Age where if you fail it, you never get to try again. Every mission in this game can be retried infinitely until you finally beat it. This means that if you fail a mission here, there is absolutely nothing punishing you. I'm assuming this was changed because of the lack of Human Plus, but honestly, I'm just not sure if that's it. FromSoftware seems to be very aware of how difficult their games are, and it's incredibly uncharacteristic of them to change something to make it this overly forgiving. And something that I'm assuming was an oversight that came with this change is that some missions still pay a small sum in advance, which was done in previous games so you would have some funds to offset the costs even if you failed. It would really only ever be used on really difficult missions. But when you get paid in advance here, if you fail the mission, you only end up profiting. Say that you get paid 10,000 credits in advance and then you fail the mission, you could load up that mission and fail it and still get paid the 10,000 because you got paid that 10,000 as soon as the mission started. This means that you could just find a mission with an advance payment pretty early on and intentionally fail it over and over again to farm up credits quickly. And I have no idea why something this fundamental and core to the series was changed. But thanks to the comments on the last video, I was introduced to a couple of mechanics from Armored Core 2 that I never knew existed. The first of these was the overboost, where you can use a very large amount of your energy reserves to get a massive boost in one direction. This is a feature that while I can see the uses for it, it's admittedly a bit beyond my current skill level with these games, so it went mostly unused for my playthrough here. Honestly, if I had done this playthrough with Human Plus and had that larger energy capacity, I might have played around with it a little more, but that just wasn't the case here. The second and more significant one was limiter release, and limiter release does pretty much exactly what it sounds like it would. It releases the safety constraints on your AC for a short time, allowing you infinite energy for about 30 seconds. The downside to this is that your AC won't be able to generate or use any energy for about 60 seconds after that 30 seconds is over. And in certain parts of the game, limiter release was actually kind of essential for me to get some of my ACs across the large gaps in some of these missions. There were a few spots throughout the game where there would just be a very large chasm to cross, or like an insanely high climb that you had to make in one large boost, and some of my ACs just didn't have the energy capacity to quite get there. So using this to get infinite energy just to cross that boundary was actually super helpful, as I didn't have to go and change the fundamentals of my build just to get through a single mission. That's all I really used it for though, as if I used it in combat, it would essentially be a gamble on whether or not I can kill my opponent in 30 seconds. And honestly, if I failed on that gamble, needing to fight another AC without using any energy is pretty much guaranteed death for me. And on that note, the encounters with other ACs in this game were hard. Like, really hard. I don't know if that's because Another Age actually has some of the hardest fights in the series so far, or because I played Armored Core 2 with Human Plus so I just wasn't ready for it, or probably a combination of the two, but some of these fights were seriously tough. There was one mission where I had to fight not one, not two, but 3 ACs at once. And they were all different types too. There was like one really heavy tank type AC. There was like a middleweight one with some pretty powerful missiles. And then there was a super mobile one flying around the entire time too. And sure, I fought 2 9-balls at a time back in Master of Arena, but 2 is less than 3, and the Gen 1 Armored Core games had worse pilot AI and slower movement compared to the Gen 2 games, so I found this way more difficult than that. One mission that I got called me in to deal with an unknown AC pilot who was rampaging and killing other Ravens. And when I arrived,
AC data assessment in progress. It seems to be an older model. I have a bad feeling about this, Raven. Please be careful.
weirdly, this was one of the harder 9-ball encounters in the series so far. I think it's just because the Gen 2 games have upped the difficulty of fighting other Ravens, on top of the fact that I've actually never defeated 9-ball without Human Plus before. There really isn't all that much to talk about with this specific 9-ball encounter outside of the fact that I spent like 20 minutes trying to beat him, but I appreciated getting one more rematch against our old friend, and at the rate we've been going, I'm sure it won't be the last. This game also introduced an entirely new type of boss fight to the Armored Core franchise, and the best way that I can think to refer to these would be epic bosses. These are bosses that go beyond just being a more advanced MT or AC, and are instead large-scale bosses that make your 30-foot tall mech look like an ant in comparison. My favorite of these was a massive MT that I was called in to deal with out in the desert. This thing was flying around at a very high altitude, making it difficult for me to fly up to its level to deal with it, and it was packing enough weaponry to melt through my heaviest AC build in seconds. There were also like 9 different parts that my FCS could lock onto, and destroying each of these parts would give me certain advantages for the rest of the fight. This thing was really cool to fight, and I hope that we get more encounters like these as the franchise goes on, which, going off of the trailers for Armored Core 6, I might just have some hope for that. But one drawback to all these cool fights was that while they were awesome on their own, they kind of took the wind out of the final boss fight of the game. There were so many great and really difficult fights throughout the entirety of Another Age, and then the final boss fight was just a double AC fight that I was able to beat on the first try. In my opinion, the giant MT should have been the final boss because it was easily the best fight in the game, and it was also easily the most difficult one. And it's weird to me that this has been an issue in both of the Gen 2 Armored Core games, because I feel like all 3 of the Gen 1 games were able to absolutely nail the memorable and challenging final bosses. But at the end of the day, Armored Core 2 Another Age is just more Armored Core 2, but much, much longer. While I feel like there were a lot of questionable decisions made during the development of this expansion, it definitely has unique positives to it that other games in the series haven't had so far, so rating this one is kind of weird for me. Overall, I did enjoy it, just not as much as the last couple of games. So all up, I'm giving Armored Core 2 Another Age a 6.8. But what do you guys think? Those of you who have played the game, those of you learning about it for the first time, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to go ahead and leave a like, a comment, a subscription, just anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this video and you haven't seen them already, then you'll definitely enjoy the rest of my Armored Core videos, so I'll have the playlist linked right here on screen.